I'm Daniel Levine, and this is the Bio Report.
The approach to post-surgical pain relief has relied on short-duration treatments and notably opioids. That's led to the associated risk of dependence and abuse, prolonged hospitalizations, and slower recoveries. Allay Therapeutics is developing an alternative to opioids to treat post-surgical pain with an initial focus on knee replacement surgeries. Allay's guitar pick size polymer is implanted during surgical procedures, and it releases the analgesic bupivacaine as it dissolves over 30 days. We spoke to Adam Gridley, CEO of Allay Therapeutics, about post-surgical pain, the need for alternatives to opioids, and the company's innovative approach to combating post-surgical pain with its implanted extended-release analgesic. Adam, thanks for joining us.
Danny, thank you very much. Look forward to the discussion today.
We're going to talk about post-surgical pain, Allay Therapeutics, and its efforts to develop an alternative to opioids. How big a need does post-surgical pain represent?
So at Allay, we always look at the need through a couple of different lenses, and that'll be a theme for our discussion today. We start with the patients first, then we look at the physicians, and then we look at the payers. So from a need perspective, patients really struggle to recover without opioids after these painful surgeries. Physicians are looking at simple, efficient therapies to give their patients what we call an active, gentle recovery. And the hope is that that's going to lead to better long-term outcomes. And of course, payers are looking for solutions that reduce the total cost of care. They're trying to obviously bring down the burden of the impact of opioids on the healthcare system. Now, in terms of patients and the societal impact, surgery is often described as the gateway to the opioid epidemic. And with that, about 50 million Americans each year who undergo surgery are prescribed opioids for postoperative pain. And we know that greater than 2.5 million of those progress to become persistent opioid users. And that's a huge problem. When we actually think about then the core target markets, there's about 30 million painful surgical procedures in orthopedics, general, abdominal, gynecological, and then cardiac and plastic surgery. And that's about a $10 billion opportunity.
Your initial focus is on post-surgical pain and total knee replacement surgery. Why start there?
Sure. Well, this goes a little bit back to our founding at an incubator in the Bay Area and in Singapore. And the rationale when we launched Allay was to go after the markets with the greatest unmet needs. And we know that pain and dissatisfaction after total knee arthroplasty or replacements, and I'll refer to that as TKA, total knee arthroplasty, as we discussed today, that surgery is known to have both the longest duration of pain, out to about 3 to 4 weeks, but also surgery with very high rates of opioid usage and dependence. And so given that you've got a pain profile that lasts out to 3-4 weeks, but the current long-acting local analgesics last only 2 to 3 days, we saw a huge unmet need. And the period that we call the therapeutic gap is the time after day 3 where opioids really remain the cornerstone of pain control. And as I mentioned before on the unmet need, this is really important because we know that opioid dependence has been shown to begin after as little as 3 to 5 days of use. And we also know that half the TKA patients are still taking opioids out at 2 weeks. And so what often happens after this surgery is that patients are chasing this breakthrough pain. It impacts their sleep, their daily activities, and you've only got opioids to fill the therapeutic gap. That results in what we describe as a miserable experience. Many patients avoid having another surgery, and the dissatisfaction rate is as high as 20%. So we decided that if we can make a big difference in total knee replacements, sky's the limit, and we can extend that leadership into different areas.
I suspect that most listeners will be familiar with the risk of addiction that comes with opioid use, but how big a problem does it represent for post-surgical patients, and what are the other problems associated with opioid use in these patients?
Great question, Danny. And the problems really are multifold. And I think everyone's aware there's, of course, the addiction risk. Everyone hears about that. But some of the other things that come up are diversion to other family members, and then opioid related adverse events, such as nausea, constipation, urinary retention. Those result in longer stays, additional hospital visits, and we know that based on publicly available information, over $20 billion of annual healthcare costs are associated with addiction, and those can be attributed to postoperative pain. Now, importantly, we've also seen that there's greater than 500,000 lives still lost between 2020 and 2024 from drug overdoses, and 75% of those involved in opioid, whether it's prescription or whether it's illegal. And then one of the things that really comes up in these challenging orthopedic indications, we often hear that acute pain leads to chronic pain. And that persistent post-surgical pain comes from the gap in pain control, as we described the therapeutic gap. And what we see after these surgeries is that an estimated 20 million patients progress to chronic post-surgical pain. So opioids isn't just about the immediate addiction. This is where you see that orthopedic surgery is associated with nearly a threefold risk of that transition to chronic pain compared to other procedures. So this is a big problem.
Your lead experimental therapy is ATX-101, a drug polymer that provides a time-release dose of bupivacaine. Why bupivacaine, and how does it work to treat pain?
Sure. This is one of the things that we started out with, where bupivacaine is a very well-known analgesic, and it's really the mainstay of virtually every surgical procedure across the world. And it's used in spinals to nerve blocks, and really is the first thing that anesthesiologists and surgeons will use. It's extremely effective. It's been used safely for over 50 years. The only challenge is it has a very short half-life, and it only lasts for maybe a day at most. And so this has been the challenge for biotechnology and pharmaceutical companies, where extensive efforts have been made to extend the duration of what is a really effective drug. Thus far, the leading competitors have managed to only see 3, maybe 4 days of pain relief at most with their bupivacaine-based formulations. Now, bupivacaine itself, it is a pan-sodium ion channel blocker, and it works as follows. You've got nerve impulses or pain signals that travel down nerves like electricity, just as it moves down a wire. Those nerve signals are transmitted by the activation of sodium channels. And so bupivacaine works by blocking sodium from going through those sodium channels, and that slows the electrical signals that travel across the nerve, thereby providing pain relief. So by using small amounts of bupivacaine over time as we do, we're just continuing to block those pain signals.
Does it have any anti-inflammatory effects?
It does. Well, the primary mechanism of action is to, of course, block those pain signals. It's believed and seen in the literature that local anesthetics, such as bupivacaine, may also have select anti-inflammatory effects, as well as potentially antimicrobial and antibacterial properties, all of which are very much welcomed in these surgical procedures.
ATX-101 is physically placed during surgery. What does ATX-101 look like, and where is it placed?
Sure. So each 500 milligram dose of ATX-101 is a triangle shape. It's about the size of a guitar pick, with the thicknesses of about a quarter. And 3 of these are placed at the end of the surgery to provide a total dose of 1,500 milligrams, which is what we're studying in our clinical trials. And the size and the shape were really designed with input from the orthopedic surgeon. We wanted to be able to place these into natural gutters or pockets that exist in the knee capsule, and thereby avoiding additional cutting or disruption of the tissue. So we often describe this as designed by the surgeons and then developed by the scientists. The placement is very important.
And what actually keeps it in place?
Sure. So the other thing that we designed in the product shape is that first, it's placed and has very little room for movement in these natural parts within the knee. However, we also included small holes in the triangle where surgeons or their staff can use a simple suture, put them into one or more of the holes to affix it into place into the joint. So it goes in quickly, not going to go anywhere, elutes out drug over the period of about 30 days.
And does a surgeon require special training to be able to place these?
No, and this was an equally important key design criteria for us. I mentioned we're always talking to the patients, we're talking to the physicians, and we're talking to the payers. One of the things that has come up in the administration of many of these products is it really had to be simple, it had to be placed consistently and save time, whereas a lot of the other products simply add to the surgery. So we worked with the surgeons to make sure that fit into the surgical process. And we also know that complex treatment regimens lead to variable results, more time, and more costs. And so we've set this up where they place the product at the end of the procedure. It's the final step after the prosthesis is put into place. And it takes less than 5 minutes with no special training, no trays or tools. They simply tuck it into the left, the right, and the top part of the knee, and then they close up. And what's nice is compared to the standard of care, which is bupivacaine, often injected around the knee capsule, or the leading competitors, we're saving anywhere from 5 to 10 minutes of administration time. There's no refrigeration, no complex handling. And so thus far, the surgeons, the scrub nurses have really loved the small size and the simplicity in our clinical studies thus far.
The polymer dissolves over time and turns into water and carbon dioxide. Does it provide a steady dose of drug, or does the dose dissipate over time?
Sure, another great question. And this is an area that was probably one of the toughest scientific challenges. Once we figured out the size and the shape, the other design criteria where we worked with the folks was going to our scientists in Singapore and the United States. And we worked to design the release of the product or the drug to mirror the patient's pain journey. So I mentioned that patients often have breakthrough pain over the first week or so, and then moderate pain over 3 to 4 weeks. That's the therapeutic gap we talked about. We designed the product with first-order kinetics, where ATX-101 has controlled dosing, and we deliver more drug in the first week when the patient's pain is the highest and they're trying to start their recovery, and then less over time with all of the drug being gone at 30 days.
And what's known about the safety, efficacy, and durability of it from studies you've done to date?
Sure. So we've been in clinical development now for over 5 years, and the clinical program itself has completed 2 exploratory dose range finding studies outside the United States. Both of those studies were stopped early due to achieving the goal of demonstrating safety, efficacy, and the controlled release of ATX-101. And those results, along with significant input from the Food and Drug Administration, or the FDA in the United States, helped inform the design of the first of the 2 pivotal registration studies, which started in February of 2025. We just completed enrollment over the summer, and will have results from that 225 patient study later this year. Now, the results from the previous study, which was a phase 2B Part A dose ranging study, went head-to-head against the standard of care bupivacaine, and we showed impressive results across a variety of key endpoints, and I'll talk about those. First is that we showed very impressive controlled release of our drug via pharmacokinetic or PK sampling. What we showed was very similar to the elution profile described We didn't see elevated levels of the active drug, and we saw extended therapeutic levels of drug out to 3 or 4 weeks. So that's the first thing that we wanted to make sure is that we had controlled delivery and it was safe and it was effective. The second thing that we looked at, which is the FDA recognized endpoint of area under the curve, or AUC, of pain intensity over time using a validated pain scale, and yet censored for the impact of opioids, we showed clinically meaningful reductions in the overall pain experience over 1, 2, 3, and 4 weeks, whereas previous studies conducted by our competitors have demonstrated improvement only over 2, 3, and 4 days. Now, we talked about opioids before. This was very important. So thirdly, we showed decreased use of opioids postoperatively. We had less opioids overall compared to the standard of care, more subjects who never took an opioid, and earlier cessation of the use of opioids, which is a key measure related to what we talked about before, that chronic use of opioids. One of the other interesting things that we saw was as we went up in higher doses, the opioid-related adverse effects went down, and that was an enormous outcome. We saw less constipation, less nausea, and urinary intention. Now, one of the last things that we saw, which no one has ever shown in these trials, and that was an improvement in function, sleep, and satisfaction. And we saw these using validated endpoints both early and over the course of 2 months. The way we describe it and what we heard from our surgeons and patients is that they got their lives back more quickly, climbing stairs, using the toilet, driving a car. These are a huge impact for those that are still in the workforce or for their caregivers. And lastly, I think the most exciting thing that links to opioids was the impact on sleep. This is often where patients are still using opioids. They feel pretty good during the day, but then at night they're tossing and turning, and that's often where they still take opioids, is to help them get it through the night, and that leads to further chronic opioid use. So we were very pleased to see the results, and that led to the design of our next study.
What's the potential to expand the use of this same formulation to other types of surgical procedures? And would you need to conduct clinical trials and seek specific approvals for other indications?
Indeed, so there's substantial potential. I think first, we believe that the current ATX-101 triangle formulation that I described that releases out drug for about 4 weeks, that can be also used in other painful orthopedic procedures like total shoulder surgeries or total hip procedures. And we expect to start a shoulder trial next year, along with our phase 3 study in total knee replacements. And then beyond ATX-101 triangle that we've got right now, we can leverage our Singapore foundational technology platform to rapidly bring multiple products into the clinic. What we can do is use the same manufacturing process, a lot of the same non-clinical data generated for ATX-101, plus the safety data we're generating in our current trials. What we can then do is develop each of our products to fit the surgery itself, and we can design the drug release to also fit that patient's pain journey. So a couple of things that we can do is have all the drug come out in days, weeks, or months based on the pain profile, and then we can change the size, the shape, and the format based on the surgical procedure site itself.
Allay is working on several other formulations for other indication. What's the range of indications you're exploring, and are they all related to surgical procedures?
Indeed. So as I noted, ATX-101 is our flagship product, first in total knee replacement, and I just mentioned shoulder and hip. But some of the other areas that we're looking at are spine and other painful procedures that need 4 weeks of pain relief. We also have a second generation product called ATX-103, which is designed for procedures where maybe you only need a week or two of pain relief. And that would still be a big improvement of the standard of care. The types of procedures there are usually soft tissue in gynecology, general surgery, potentially plastic surgery, and that's where you need different strips, shapes, sizes, and flexible implants. And then we also have a product called ATX-301, which is expected to be a 5 to 7 day duration injectable for the anesthesiology community, where they will use nerve blocks or spinals. And these are very effective, but still pretty variable in performance. And our hope is that each of these products could be in the clinic over the next several years based on that shared foundation platform. And our hope is that in each of these cases, we can move into human clinical testing quickly.
You're able to create different states of the polymer, but are they all using the same polymer?
They are in many cases. So we're using a very well understood polymer that's used in vicryl sutures pretty much every day across the world. And that polymer resorbs after about anywhere from 6 to 8 weeks. We can use different polymers that have shorter duration that allow for products to flow. And then we can also use different drugs as well. And that's the beauty of the pipeline that came out of Singapore.
So where are you in development along these various therapies?
Sure. So we're doing a number of different non-clinical studies on the various formulations that I talked about. Most of the implants are using bupivacaine and similar polymers, but we can also look at different analgesics. We can look at antibiotics to other APIs. So as I noted, we'll start our shoulder study next year with our current ATX-101 formulation. And then some of the 2 and 4 week formulations that are currently in late stage non-clinical testing would enter the clinic over the next couple of years. And our thought is that after ATX-101 is hopefully approved by the FDA in mid-2028, we can then bring those second generation products into the clinic and onto the market starting in 29 and 2030. And we also have a ropivacaine-based injectable that I mentioned for anesthesiologists that could enter into the clinic over the next couple of years.
In June, the company raised $57.5 million in a Series D funding. How far will existing cash take you?
Indeed, we brought in a great syndicate of global investors from the US and Singapore, as well as some of our strategic partners in Japan. And that current funding or cash will take us into the third quarter of 2026. And we'll kick off our next fundraising over the next several months based on our data from the most recent ATX-101 trial. And we anticipate that that'll be released over the next month or so.
It has still been a tough time for fundraising. What was discussion with investors like, and what do you think ultimately got them to invest?
Sure. It has been a difficult time in fundraising. It is feeling better over the last couple of quarters, but I think a couple of fundamental things that allowed us to complete that financing was that we were coming in with best-in-class clinical data. We were able to save time and money for the surgeons. As we know, in our current healthcare system and reimbursement environment, that's been a real challenge. You may have a great product, but if you can't get it reimbursed, then that's not going to meet many of the investor needs. And by tying that too, of course, a lot of the push to move these surgeries out of the hospitals and to save money by payers, we seem to meet many of the requirements that investors were looking for. Best-in-class data, a very large market, and a huge unmet need, I think, still brought in considerable interest. And as we're talking to investors, naturally, the goal of having just beyond ATX-101, a series of therapeutic opportunities afterward, I think created a lot of interest. And so this is where we're excited to report our next results and then move into the next phase of fundraising, because the opioid epidemic is not going away. This is still a huge issue where patients transition to chronic pain. And so the hope is the sooner the better for these patients. And we're getting awfully close to finishing up those last trials and bringing this to the FDA.
Adam Gridley, CEO of Allay Therapeutics. Adam, thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you very much, Danny. It was a real pleasure.
Thanks for listening. The Bio Report is a production of the Levine Media Group. To automatically download this podcast each week, subscribe to our RSS feed or through iTunes or other podcast manager. To join our mailing list, go to levinemediagroup.com. We'd love to hear from you. If you want to drop us a line or are interested in sponsoring this podcast, send an email to danny@levinemediagroup.com. Special thanks to Jonah Levine, who composed our theme music, and the Jonah Levine Collective, which performs it.